Hello, everybody. Get your King James Bibles and let's take a look in the book of Psalms, chapter 18 and verse 46. The Lord liveth, and blessed be my rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. Now, this is the conclusion of the mountain series. And of course, what are mountains made out of? They're made out of rock. And sometimes the Bible translates something as rock, sometimes as stone. But, you know, let's face it. What's the difference between a rock and a stone? I don't know. I'm not a geologist. But, all right, let's take a look at Psalms 27 and verse 5. For in the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock. All right, let's take a look at Matthew chapter 7 and verse 24. Jesus speaking. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine, so you got to hear the sayings that Jesus says, right? Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, ooh. So we got to hear and we got to do? Really? Well, let's take a look in the book of James real quick before we get into Matthew. James chapter 1 and verse 22. Now, perhaps you know James. He was a son of a woman named Mary and had a father named Joseph. So guess who he grew up with? Oh yeah, he grew up with Jesus. His whole life, he knew Jesus. James chapter 1 and verse 22. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. For if any be a hearer of the word, and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass. For he beholdeth himself, and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. So, we're to be doers. All right, so back to Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, the storms of life, right? And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell not. For it was founded upon a rock. And the Bible tells you the Lord's the rock. So when you get a Catholic trying to tell you that Peter's the rock, wrong. The Bible clearly says the Lord's the rock. Verse 26. And every one that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not, Don't you hear people say, oh, well, if you're obedient, that's work salvation? Don't they always throw that at you, these false teachers, you know? They always throw that out at you. If you try to be obedient to the Word of God, they throw that at you. Oh, you're one of those lordship salvation people. You're justifying yourselves by what you do. No, it's called the perfect law of liberty. Do you know that Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments? Did you know that? Jesus said that. Yep, in John 14, verse 15, Jesus said, if ye love me, keep my commandments. And if you don't love him, well, don't worry about it. Don't be like all the people that scream lordship salvation. Oh, you're earning your salvation. Ooh. Verse 26, Matthew 7. And everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. Don't let your house fall, people. Verse 28, and it came to pass when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine. For he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. The scribes were the copyists of the Bible. You see, they knew the letter of the law. Jesus knew the letter of the law and had the spirit of the law. But the law doesn't save anybody. Christ saves people, but the law doesn't. Okay, Psalms 31 and verse 3, for thou art my rock. Oh yeah, you better establish your house upon a rock. For thou art my rock and my fortress. Therefore, for thy name's sake, lead me and guide me. Psalms chapter 40 and verse 2. He brought me up also out of an horrible pit. What horrible pit is that? The pit of hell. When you read the account of Abraham's bosom, all the Old Testament saints went to a special compartment in hell. I did a study on that on my other channel. He brought me up also out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay. What was Adam made out of? Clay, right? He brought me up also out of an horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. Still don't believe God's the rock? How about Psalms 42 and verse 9. I will say unto God, my rock. Catholics would say, oh, that's mistranslated. It should be, I will say unto Peter, my rock. You know, I like Peter. He's probably my favorite apostle. I can relate to him more than any of the others. I can't relate to Paul. I'm not a learned scholar like he was. Peter was just a fisherman. Sat at the feet of Jesus for 3.5 years. But Peter's not the rock. Psalms 42 verse 9, I will say unto God, my rock, why hast thou forgotten me? Why go I mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? Psalm 62, verse 6, He only is my rock and my salvation. Peter's not the salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. Verse 7, In God is my salvation and my glory. In God is my salvation and my glory. You see, our glory is in God. And Christ was God in the flesh. That's what Emmanuel, Emmanuel means God with us. In God is my salvation and my glory, the rock of my strength, and my refuge is in God. Psalm 78, verse 35, and they remember that God was their rock, and the high God, their Redeemer. A Redeemer. What is a Redeemer? Well, let's say back in the old days, matter of fact, in England, just a few hundred years ago, if you borrowed money and you couldn't pay it back, you started a business and it failed, or if you wanted to learn a trade, let's say you wanted to be a blacksmith, somebody that worked with iron, and you didn't have the equipment, you didn't have the know-how, what you would do is you would become what is called an indentured servant for a certain period of time. Matter of fact, there was one famous American guy that did that, and he became a gunsmith. Somebody taught him how to make firearms. And, those were all handmade back in them days. So, I mean, you're talking, it could take you 3, 5, 7, 10 years to learn how to do everything. I mean, just learning how to make a stock out of the wood, how to carve it and everything, could probably take a year. But I mean, the intricate metal parts that were all handmade before there was mass production, I mean, you had to learn how to do all this stuff. So it took years. For example, the Japanese sword makers, they would take 1 or 2 apprentices, and they would help the sword maker, and he would show them. It would take years and years and years. So, basically, you were an indentured servant was basically like a sort of like a slave, you know? So let's say you had a business, you borrowed money, you borrowed money for your business, the business failed. You could be sold, well, you could sell yourself to be an indentured servant to somebody for a certain period of time and then pay the loan back. Well, let's say that you had a rich relative that didn't like the fact that you were, an indentured servant, and they, put you on a ship somewhere to be a shipmate, and they were going to take you and rip you away from your family. And your rich relative said, no, I don't like that idea. So your rich relative goes to the person that owns, that you owe the money to, and says, how much for me to pay back the loan? I want to redeem my relative. Well, that's what it would be. That's what it meant to be redeemed. So what does it mean? And they remember that God was their rock and the high God their redeemer. What is God redeeming us from? Sin and death. That is why Christ came to earth, to redeem us from the curse of the law. The Old Testament, these Hebrew roots people, these Torah keepers, these Jews, the law never saved anybody. They can boast on the day of judgment, well, We kept the law 99.9% of the time. But you broke it that 1.1 time. You're guilty. You break one law, you're guilty of all of them. Well, Lord, I could have stole. I worked for a company for 205 days, Monday through Friday, whatever, for, 50 weeks, 52 weeks, whatever, 51 weeks, 40, whatever, you get the idea. And I didn't steal from them. 199 times I didn't steal. But one time you did. Is God going to say, oh, well, you were good 199 times and you only broke the law once. Don't worry about it. No big deal. No, you're guilty. You're guilty. And you go before the court, and guess what? You go to jail, maybe. Unless you're a rich Wall Street banker, then you get a promotion, right? But if you're a lowlife, as they consider us, well, you go to jail. But Christ redeems us from the curse of the law. That's why he came. God is our Redeemer. Christ is God. I hope you understand that. Psalms 89 and verse 26, he shall cry unto me, thou art my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. Psalms 95 and verse 1. O come, let us sing unto the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. And if you've ever heard me sing, you'd say, oh, yeah, joyful noise, with the emphasis on noise. Isaiah 8 and verse 14. And he shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling, and for a rock of offense, to both the houses of Israel. Both the houses of Israel? Yes, you had Israel and you had Judah. There were two houses of Israel. But for a stone of stumbling and for a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, for a gin and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the capital of Judah. Judah was part of Israel, but Israel was not necessarily part of Judah. In the book of Romans, chapter 9 and verse 33. As it is written, behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone and rock of offense, and whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. And what do you mean a stumbling stone and a rock of offense? In 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 4. Now, Romans and Corinthians were all written by Paul. There's a lot of people that hate Paul. All right, 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 4. And did all drink, speaking of Israel in the wilderness, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. It's talking about the book of Exodus, people. Moses had the children of Israel carry a rock around. Moses smote the rock, and water came out. And let me tell you something. If you're in the desert and you don't have any water, you're dead quick. Maybe 2 days, maybe 3 at the most. Some deserts, you live a day. Ever heard of Death Valley? It was well aptly named because there's no water in Death Valley and it's hot. I was in Death Valley one time going from, I think, Nevada to I think somewhere in California. I don't remember where. Maybe LA. I'm not sure. It's like I was on Eastern time, but it was like 10:30 at night, and it was like 112 degrees. Yeah, after the sun had set. Now 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, yeah, it cools down. It gets, but can you imagine 112 at night? What was it during the day? It'll dry you out and cook you quick. Water, very important. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. All right, let's go to the book of Numbers. I was wrong. It's Numbers, not Exodus. Numbers chapter 20 and starting in verse 1. I guess we're going to read a good part of this. Then the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, into the desert of Zin in the first month. Some Bibles translate this the desert of Sin, S-I-N. Into the desert of Zin in the first month, and the people abode in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Miriam was the sister of Moses. Verse 2. And there was no water for the congregation, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. Oh yeah, this is the people. We don't have any water, man. We're going to die. It's this so-called man of God, this Moses. He brings us out here to die in the desert without water. Let's kill this guy, man. He's a bad dude. And verse 3, and the people chode with Moses and spake, saying, Would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. And why have ye brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? And wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt?